The morning my brother called to tell me he was getting married, I was standing in my kitchen in Sacramento watching the fog come down off the American River and settle into the low places between the houses. It was the kind of fog that made the neighborhood look unfinished, like someone had started drawing it and stopped halfway through and walked away. The streetlights were still on even though it was nearly 7, their light catching the moisture in the air and scattering it into something softer than illumination. I had a mug of coffee I hadn't touched yet and a grocery list magnet to the refrigerator that I'd been ignoring for 4 days, and the only sound in the house was the furnace cycling on and the faint drip of the kitchen faucet that I kept meaning to fix. The call came at 6:52. "Dallas," my brother said. "I'm doing it. I asked her last night." His name was Colton James Merritt, 29 years old, youngest of 3, our parents' favorite in the way that youngest children often become favorites without anyone deciding to make them one. I was 34. Our sister Presley lived up in Portland and kept a careful distance from the mechanisms of the family, the way a person keeps distance from a machine they don't fully trust. She had moved there 6 years earlier, after a brief and unsuccessful return to Sacramento following her own divorce, and had found the particular equilibrium that comes from putting 350 miles between yourself and the people you love most. I understood the calculus even if I'd made a different one. I lived 12 minutes from our parents' house by the river, which meant I was the one who showed up when things needed showing up for, the one whose car appeared in the driveway before anyone had asked, because I had learned early that waiting to be asked was its own kind of failure. "That's wonderful," I said. I meant it. I set the mug down on the counter. "Her name's Wren. You've met her twice. You liked her." I had liked her. She was compact and quick and laughed at things before they were quite finished being funny, which I'd found charming both times we'd been in the same room. She had a way of touching Colt's arm when she disagreed with something he said, not a correction, just a presence, a reminder that she was still in the conversation and still had a position on it. I remember thinking she was exactly what he needed, which was someone who wouldn't go quiet when things got loud, someone who would still be in the room when the room got hard. "When?" I asked. 8 months. She wants Hawaii. Big island. I looked at the fog. 8 months felt like enough time for most things, enough time to plan correctly, enough time for goodwill to build or for problems to surface depending on which direction you were pointed. "Mom and Dad know?" I asked. There was a half-beat pause. Not long, just the length of a breath held and let go. "Wren's going to call them," he said. I noted the phrasing. Not "we're going to call them." Not "I'm going to call them." Wren was going to call them, which meant Colt had already placed that particular task on the other side of the table and stepped back from it. "Okay," I said. "Dallas." "Yeah. She and Mom haven't always, it's been complicated. I just need it to go well." "I know," I said. "That's all I'm asking. Just for it to go smoothly." "I know," I said again. We hung up. I picked up the coffee. It had gone lukewarm while we talked, but I drank it anyway, standing at the counter, watching the fog begin to thin at the edges where the sun was starting to push through from the east. I thought about my brother's voice, the particular register he'd used, the one I'd been hearing since we were teenagers, which was the register of someone who had already made a decision and was now, gently, asking permission to have already made it. I thought about Wren calling my parents. I rinsed the mug and went to get ready for work. My parents had lived in the same house in Sacramento for 31 years. A 3-bedroom craftsman 2 blocks from the river, the kind of house that held its value quietly, that didn't announce itself from the street but revealed itself slowly once you were inside it. The built-in bookshelves my father had added in the front room, the bay window my mother had turned into a reading corner with a cushion she'd reupholstered twice. The kitchen that had been reorganized so many times over the decades that every drawer felt inevitable, exactly where it should be. My father, Wade Merritt, was 63 and had spent the bulk of his working life as a civil engineer for the county. He was the kind of man who fixed things before they broke and never mentioned having done it. My mother, Loretta, kept a garden that ran the full length of the south side of the house. Tomatoes, peppers, rosemary in 3 varieties, a fig tree she'd planted the year Colt was born that was now taller than the roofline and dropped fruit every August that she turned into preserves she gave away to people who didn't deserve them. She was small and precise and had a memory for details, dates, names, the specific words people had used years ago in conversations they'd long forgotten, that I had inherited in modified form, more structural than emotional, better with numbers than with names. They were good people. Not uncomplicated people. My father had a temper that emerged sideways when he was tired or stretched thin, coming out not as the reduction, the tightening, the engineering of fury into silence, but as something harder to name and longer to dissipate. My mother absorbed other people's pain so efficiently that she sometimes forgot to put it down. But good people, fundamentally. The kind who had sat in every bleacher, driven every carpool, shown up for every gradation of the word showing up, and had done all of it without keeping score. Wren called them on a Thursday. My mother told me about it the following Sunday over dinner, which I ate at their house most Sundays because it was a habit that had started when I moved back to Sacramento after my divorce 3 years earlier and had simply never stopped, had calcified into something neither of us acknowledged as the lifeline it probably was. She was very pleasant, my mother said. She was passing the bread basket and studying the middle distance above my father's head. But, I said. My father was looking at his plate with the focused attention of a man who is not eating but is giving the food something to do. She said the wedding would be on the Big Island, my mother said. She said it was going to be small. Intimate. Her family and a few close friends of Colt's. I waited. She didn't mention anything about tickets, my mother said. Or a hotel. Or what we'd need to do to get there. She said she'd send us the date so we could, she paused. Set down the bread basket. Smoothed the edge of the tablecloth once with 2 fingers, a gesture so small I almost missed it. So we could plan accordingly. Those were the words. The bread passed. I took a slice I didn't need and set it on the side of my plate. Plan accordingly, I said. That's what she said. Plan accordingly. My father picked up his fork. Set it down. His jaw moved once, not chewing, just that small lateral adjustment he made when something was working through him that he wasn't ready to say out loud. Hawaii's not cheap, he said. Not a complaint. A statement of structural fact, delivered in the voice of a man who had spent 30 years assessing structural facts. Round trip from Sacramento, my mother said quietly, is running about $1,100 a person right now. I looked. No one said anything for a moment. The table held the silence between us the way tables hold things, evenly, without preference. I'll talk to Colt, I said. Neither of them responded. My mother picked up her fork. My father picked up his. And the silence that came after was the particular kind that means we already know what you'll find when you look. I texted Colt that night. I kept it direct. Hey, did you and Wren talk to Mom and Dad about flights and accommodation for Hawaii? He replied 6 hours later. Wren's handling all the logistics. She's got a system. I read that twice. Then I set the phone face down on the coffee table and went to wash the dinner containers I'd brought home, because my mother always sent me home with food and I always washed the containers the same night so they didn't sit. I stood at the sink with my hands under the hot water and thought about that word. System. A system implied structure. It implied that someone had thought carefully about what went where and in what order, that the placements were deliberate. I had spent 10 years in commercial real estate acquisitions, which was in its purest form the work of understanding what things were actually worth versus what people were claiming they were worth, and one thing that work had taught me was that a system could be designed to include people or to exclude them. Both were systems. Both required planning. The difference was in what you were planning for. I didn't text back. I dried the containers and stacked them by the door and went to bed. I called Presley on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks after the engagement call. She had heard about the Hawaii plan from my mother, not the details, just the broad shape of it, the destination and the guest count and the fact that Wren was managing logistics, and she had been waiting, with the particular patience she had developed living 350 miles away, for someone to tell her what she was actually waiting to hear. How is Mom taking it? She asked. I was sitting in the back corner of the office after everyone else had left, the building quiet around me in the specific way it goes quiet after 5, not empty exactly, just occupied differently. The phones stopped and the overhead lights on their timer schedule clicking off one section at a time. She's holding it well, I said. Meaning she's absorbing it and not saying much. Yes, I said. Presley was quiet for a moment. I could hear her kitchen in the background, Portland evening sounds, rain against a window, the particular acoustic of her apartment that I'd visited once and could still picture clearly, the tall windows and the second-hand rug and the way the light came in from the west and went bronze before it disappeared. Do you have a read on Wren's family? She asked. Whether this is coming from her side or whether Colt is, I don't know. Whether he's actually driving any of this. I thought about the call. The phrasing Colt had used when he'd told me about Ren calling our parents, not we, not I, but Ren. The way he had stepped away from the hard parts and described that as logistics management. The pattern of it, how many times over the past year I had watched him hand something difficult to Ren the way you hand something heavy to someone who is good at carrying things, without asking whether they want to be carrying it or whether the thing you're handing over was yours to hand. I think he's steering by not steering, I said. Another quiet. Then yeah. Just that. The particular compact agreement of a person who has been watching the same thing from a different angle and has arrived at the same conclusion. Are you going to say something to him? She asked. When I have something to say, I said. Dal. Her voice shifted, not softer, just more direct. The voice she used when she had decided something needed saying. You know I'm not going to be able to get down there. If this turns into something. I know that, I said. I'm not saying I don't want to be part of it. I'm saying geographically I'm. I know, I said. Presley. I'm not asking you to drive down here. I'm just telling you what's happening. Okay. A pause. Keep telling me. We talked for another 20 minutes, not about Colt, not about the wedding. About her work, a research position at a Portland urban planning nonprofit that suited her in the way that jobs suit people when they have finally found the thing that uses all of them, not just the professional parts. About the rain. About the fig preserves my mother had put up in August and whether she'd received her share, which she had, and which she'd been putting on toast with a particular enthusiasm she described in enough detail that I could tell she was genuinely happy about it, which made me happy in the low-grade uncomplicated way that the small things do. After I hung up I sat in the quiet office for a moment. The overhead lights in the outer section had gone off. Through the glass partition I could see the empty assistants' desks, the dark monitors, the accumulation of small objects on each desk that told you something about the person who occupied it without being able to tell you everything. A plant, a mug with a logo, a framed photograph small enough to be private from across the room. I thought about Presley in Portland, holding the distance. She had made a calculation 6 years ago when she moved there, had looked at the family's machinery and decided that the right relationship with it was one conducted from the outside. I didn't disagree with her. I had made the opposite calculation, and some days I thought we had both been right and some days I thought we had both been wrong and most days I didn't think about it at all because there was always something that needed doing. But on a Wednesday evening in the empty office, with the outer lights off and the Midtown folder still open on the desk in front of me, I thought about her specifically. About the fact that she already knew something was off, had known it from my tone, not from the details I'd given her, which were sparse. She had learned to read me the way younger siblings learn to read the older one who holds the information, not from what is said but from the weight of how it's said, the particular quality of careful in my voice that meant I was keeping something contained. She had asked me to keep telling her. I had said I would. I was not yet sure what there was to tell, or rather I knew the shape of what was coming but could not yet say it aloud, because saying it aloud before it was done felt like a different kind of error than the one I was trying to correct. What I had found was a structure. What I was going to do with it was not yet a fact. And I had learned in a decade of acquisitions work that there was a version of talking about a move that was analysis and a version that was announcement, and that the second one was only appropriate once the move was made. I thought about my mother ironing the tablecloth and sending me home with food. I thought about Ren's system and the 42 guests at a resort on the Kohala coast, and the particular arithmetic of a room block designed for 42 people that did not include the groom's parents. I turned off my desk lamp and drove home across the bridge. The text from Ren came on a Tuesday, 7 weeks after the engagement call. I know it was a Tuesday because I was at my desk in the middle of reviewing a property assessment for a mixed-use building in Midtown Sacramento, a conversion project, former light industrial, the kind of deal where the numbers looked clean on the surface and the complications lived in the soil reports, when my phone lit up on the corner of the desk. I glanced at the screen. Ren's name. I finished the paragraph I was reading, then put the document aside and picked up the phone. The first text was a screenshot of a wedding website. Soft watercolor florals in coral and ivory, a March date centered in a serif font, a guest count at the bottom of the page, 42. The second text was a link to a resort on the Kohala coast, one of the older properties, the kind that had been there long enough to have a reputation but recent enough renovations to charge current rates. This is where everyone's staying. That was the entire message, 5 words and a link. The third text came 30 seconds after the second. Just FYI, the room block is full. We booked out our allotment. Your parents would need to find somewhere else to stay. I sat with that. The room block was full. The block that Ren had reserved for 42 people at a resort on the Kohala coast did not include my parents. Not because the block was small and they'd been an afterthought, because the block was full. The math of 42 guests with no room for the groom's parents was not accidental math. I typed back, okay, so what's the plan for getting them there? Flights, hotel? The reply came fast. The kind of fast that meant it had been considered in advance, composed somewhere prior to this exchange and held ready. If they want to come, they can figure it out. Not my problem. I read it twice. Not because the words were ambiguous, they were precise, actually precise in the way that certain kinds of cruelty are precise, the kind that knows exactly what it's doing and has decided that's fine. I read it twice because I needed to let the meaning arrive at its own pace, the way you let something settle before you decide what to do about it. I set the phone down on the desk. I picked up my pen. I recapped it once slowly, feeling the small click of the cap seating. I set the pen down parallel to the edge of the notepad. My voice, when I leaned toward my open doorway and told my assistant to push my 11 o'clock by 30 minutes, was steady and carried no particular weight. I drove to my parents' house that evening without calling ahead. The fog had come back by the time I crossed the river, thinner than morning fog, more like a haze, the kind that blurred the streetlights without quite obscuring them. My father's garage door was up. He was bent over the engine bay of the old Tacoma he'd been restoring for the better part of 2 years, a 1994, dark green under the shop grime, a project he'd started the winter my mother's sister died, which I had always understood as the kind of project a man starts when he needs to put his hands on something that responds to care in a predictable way. He had a work lamp clamped to the hood, a drop cloth under the truck, and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead where he'd forgotten them. When he heard my car pull up, he straightened slowly, the way a man straightens when he's been bent over something at the wrong height for longer than his back appreciated. "Didn't know you were coming," he said. "I didn't either until I was already on the bridge," I said. He looked at me for a moment. He was good at reading what was behind a face. He'd learned it somewhere in the middle of a long career spent negotiating between project specs and political realities, learning which worries to surface and which to hold close. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, the slow, deliberate way he did everything. "Your mother made lentil soup," he said. "With that sourdough she's been doing." "I'll eat in a few minutes," I said. "Can I ask you something first?" He leaned back against the truck's front grille and crossed his arms, the shop rag still in one hand. The work lamp threw a hard yellow light across one side of his face, leaving the other in shadow. He was 63 and looked it fully, not diminished, just completely arrived at the age he was, the way certain things are complete. "The joint account," I said. "The one you opened for Colt in 2009. His expression didn't move. That was the thing about my father. Change happened in him like change happens in geology, in layers and over time, deep before it was visible. "What about it?" he said. "You still on it?" He held my gaze across the length of the garage. The work lamp hummed. Down the street, a dog barked twice in quick succession and then went quiet. My father's jaw moved once, that small lateral shift. "Never took my name off," he said. "Okay," I said. "Dallas." His voice dropped a register. "What happened?" I told him. Not everything, not the 3 texts in sequence, not the exact words of the third one. Just the shape of it. No flights arranged. No room in the block. No plan for getting them to Hawaii. He stood very still while I talked. The shop rag hung from his hand. When I finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that I heard the furnace kick on inside the house. "She said it's not her problem," I said. Something moved across my father's face then. Not the reduction, the tightening, the engineering of fury into silence. Something else. Something quieter and further down, in the place where a person keeps the things they expected to be different than they turned out to be. His jaw tightened once. His eyes didn't move from mine. He looked down at the shop rag. He folded it in thirds, lengthwise first, then across, with the same precision he applied to everything he handled. Set it on the truck's bumper. "I see," he said. "I'm going to make a call tomorrow morning," I said. "Before work. I wanted you to know first." He looked up. He didn't ask what call. He didn't ask what I was going to do or what I thought the call would accomplish. He just looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded once, a single, complete movement, and turned back to the engine. I went inside. My mother was at the stove stirring the soup. The kitchen smelled like lentils and bay leaf and the sourdough cooling on the rack by the window, and the light in there was warm and specific, the overhead fixture she'd replaced twice because she kept choosing bulbs that were too blue before finally finding the temperature she wanted. She looked up when I came in. "I thought I heard your car," she said. "I was talking to Dad," I said. She turned back to the pot and stirred it once more, slowly. "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you a bowl." I sat at the kitchen table, the one they'd had for 28 years, a round oak table with a crack in the finish near the center that had been there since the year Presley knocked a casserole dish off the counter and the dish landed on the table edge on the way down. Nobody had ever fixed it. It had become part of the table. My mother brought 2 bowls and sat across from me. We ate for a moment without talking. The soup was good, it was always good, with the preserved lemon she added that I'd never quite managed to replicate in my own kitchen. "Did Colt call you today?" I asked. "No," she said. She broke a piece of bread without looking at it. "Did you call him?" I thought about it. She set the bread down. I didn't want him to feel like I was making it harder. I looked at her. My mother, 61 years old, who had driven me to swim meets in January and grown a fig tree for 30 years and absorbed other people's pain until she forgot she was holding it, sitting across from me not wanting to make things harder for the son who hadn't called. "You're not making anything harder," I said. "I know that," she said. But she said it the way people say things they're still working on believing. We finished the soup. She sent me home with the rest of the sourdough wrapped in a tea towel, which I put on the passenger seat of the car, and I drove back across the river with the haze closing in around the bridge lights and the bread sitting there like a quiet argument for the importance of showing up. I made the call the next morning. Wednesday, 6:58, before I'd eaten anything, standing at the kitchen counter with the notebook open in front of me. Not to Colt. Not to Ren. Not to anyone in the family. I called the bank. It took 11 minutes. I had the account number from a statement my father had forwarded me 3 years earlier when he'd needed help untangling something for a tax filing, a number I'd written in the back of a notebook without thinking much about it, filed away the way you file things when some quiet part of you understands that information has a way of becoming useful later even when it doesn't look useful now. The account had been opened in 2009. A joint checking account, Wade Merritt and Colton James Merritt, established for the purpose of managing college expenses during Colt's 4 years at Oregon. My father had deposited regularly through those 4 years, and after graduation Colt had simply kept using the account. My father had mentioned it once in passing, he never got around to separating it out, and honestly neither did I, in the tone of someone describing something mild and administrative that had slipped between other priorities. 14 years of slipping. The bank representative confirmed the account structure in the first 3 minutes. Wade Merritt remained a joint account holder. Joint account holders, under the terms of the account agreement, carried full access and full authority. I asked my follow-up questions. I wrote the answers in the notebook in 2 clean columns, the way I organize everything that matters. When I hung up, I stood at the counter for a moment without moving. Outside, the morning fog had come back, thinner than it had been all week, burning at the edges, the river just visible through the gap between the houses across the street, silver and flat in the early light. Ren was flying out of Sacramento International on a Thursday. 3 days from now. Business class, according to the itinerary Colt had forwarded to the family group text the previous week with a line of blue wave emojis and a sunglasses emoji underneath. She had booked her ticket on a Tuesday. 2 days before I made my call. She did not know what I knew. She did not know that the account Colt had been using for 14 years, the account she had probably understood as his, straightforwardly his, the way you understand a checking account to belong to the person whose name you know is on it, had a second name. A name that had been sitting there quietly for 14 years without anyone thinking about it, without anyone needing to think about it, until a Tuesday in March when 5 words on a phone screen made thinking about it suddenly necessary. My father's name. And my father had said never took my name off in the tone of a man stating a structural fact about load-bearing capacity, which was the only tone he had for facts he considered non-negotiable. I closed the notebook. I started the coffee. I stood at the window while it brewed and watched the fog thin at the river line, the light strengthening behind it, and I thought about Ren at the gate on Thursday, carry-on over one shoulder, boarding pass up on her phone, moving through the jetway toward a wedding she had organized down to the last place setting. I thought about a room block full of 42 people. I thought about plan accordingly and not my problem, and my mother saying she hadn't called because she didn't want to make things harder. The coffee finished. I poured a mug. Outside the window, the fog was nearly gone. The group text came on a Friday afternoon while I was in a closing meeting for the Midtown conversion, 4 hours around a conference table, the kind of meeting where the air gets stale and everyone's coffee goes cold at the same intervals, and you learn more about who people are by watching them handle a stalled negotiation than you ever would by asking them directly. The seller's representative had a habit of tapping his pen against his legal pad whenever a number was presented that he didn't like, a small percussion that everyone in the room had learned to read as a tell. I had presented 3 numbers in the last hour. He had tapped after each one. I felt my phone vibrate in my jacket pocket and left it there. When the meeting broke at 4:30, I walked back to my own office, closed the door, and sat down in the quiet. Colt had sent a photo to the family group text. He and Ren at a venue walkthrough, an outdoor space, palm trees and volcanic rock visible at the edges of the frame, the ocean a flat pale stripe at the horizon behind them. Ren was laughing at something off camera, her hand on Colt's forearm. Colt was looking at her with the particular expression of a man who is still slightly amazed that this is his life, which I recognized because I had worn a version of that expression myself. Once, before my own marriage had taught me that amazement was not the same thing as readiness and that the two could coexist for longer than was useful. The venue is even better in person, Colt had written. 42 is going to feel like exactly the right number when you're all standing here. Then, below it in the family thread, Ren had added, can't wait for everyone to see it. Everyone. I sat with that word for a moment. Then I checked the separate thread, just Ren and me, the one she'd initiated after the room block conversation, and there was a new message there as well. Hey Dallas, just wanted to circle back on the logistics thing. I know the room block situation was a little awkward to hear. The resort was genuinely beyond budget for the full group, we had to make some hard choices, and I'm sure your parents will find something great nearby. There are tons of options in the area at different price points. Happy to send some links if that would help. I read it twice. Different price points. As though the issue were my parents' inability to locate affordable lodging rather than the fact that their son's fiancée had organized a 42-person destination wedding and had not included 2 of those 42 in any material sense of the word. As though sending links was the same thing as taking responsibility for an arrangement. As though the gesture of offering to help find something cheaper was generosity rather than its precise opposite. I set the phone face down on the desk. I pulled the Midtown closing documents back toward me and went through the remaining review pages. My hands moved through them with the same steadiness they always did, finding the lines that needed attention, flagging the ones that would need language adjusted before signatures. I worked for 40 minutes. I did not answer the text. My father called on Saturday morning at 8:15. I was on my second cup of coffee at the kitchen window, watching a pair of scrub jays work through the seed I'd put on the back fence rail, quarreling with the focused intensity of creatures for whom this particular fence rail was the entire world. Your Uncle Bo called me last night, my father said. I kept my eyes on the jays. One of them had a bead on the better cluster of seeds and was repositioning, angling for advantage. What did he say? I asked. Colt called him first. Asked him to talk to me. My father's voice was level and careful, the voice he used when something had moved him past the place his usual voice could hold without effort. About being reasonable. About understanding that Ren has a vision for the day, that weddings cost what they cost, and that it wouldn't be fair to her for it to turn into, he paused, a family obligation situation. That's the phrase Bo quoted back to me. Said he was quoting Colt directly. The phrase sat in the kitchen between me and the window. Obligation situation. My parents attending their son's wedding, the son they had driven to soccer practice and helped move into 3 different apartments and called every Sunday for 29 years, had been classified by that son as an obligation situation. A problem category. A thing to be managed and contained before it could expand. What did Bo say back to him? I asked. Bo told him that was a strange way to talk about your own parents coming to your wedding, my father said. And then he hung up and called me. Are you okay? I asked. A silence. Long enough to count to 4. "I'm fine," he said. His voice carried the particular flatness of a man who has decided that being fine is the correct answer and is now committed to it regardless of whether it is true. My father had come from people who considered the naming of their own pain a kind of imposition on whoever was listening, a calculus he'd absorbed somewhere in childhood and never fully examined, which had made him reliable and steadfast and costly in ways he didn't track. "I'll talk to Colt," I said. "Dallas." A pause. "Don't make it worse." "I won't make it worse," I said. We hung up. Outside, the second jay had retreated to the far fence post, defeated, while the first picked through the seed with methodical satisfaction. I watched them for another moment. Then I went to get dressed. Colt lived in East Sacramento in a second-floor apartment on a street of wide canopied elms that were just beginning to show the first yellow of autumn at the tips of the higher branches. His building had a courtyard with a fountain that hadn't run in at least 2 years and a row of terracotta pots someone had planted with succulents and then largely forgotten, though a few of them had survived anyway, which said something either about succulents or about the particular stubbornness of things that want to live. He answered the door in running clothes, the look of someone who had been home long enough to change into them but not yet gone out, or had come back and not yet changed back, one or the other. When he saw me, his face did the thing it did when he'd been anticipating a conversation and was now having to have it before he was ready for it. "Come in," he said. The apartment was tidy in the way of spaces maintained by agreement rather than instinct, surfaces clear, everything in a designated place, no accumulation of the ordinary residue of daily life that gathers in a home where someone is fully at ease. Wren's influence, I thought, without judgment. Just observation. I had visited this apartment before Wren and I knew what Colt's natural domestic state looked like, which involved stacks of things on horizontal surfaces and a specific bowl on the coffee table that held an evolving collection of items he wasn't sure what to do with yet. That bowl was gone. I didn't sit down. He didn't offer. "You called Beau," I said. He crossed his arms. Not defensively, with the particular tiredness of someone who has been managing a problem for longer than they've admitted out loud. "I was trying to smooth something over before it turned into a bigger thing," he said. "By asking our uncle to explain to Dad why coming to his son's wedding is an obligation situation." Something shifted in his face, not quite discomfort, something more like the expression of a person who has heard their own words repeated back in a different acoustic and doesn't recognize them. "That's not what I meant by Colt." My voice was quiet. "Mom and Dad have no flights. No hotel. No room in the block. Wren told me directly it's not her problem. And now you've sent Beau to manage Dad's feelings about it." He looked at the window. The elm on the street outside moved in a small wind, its shadow crossing the wall in slow, irregular intervals. "Wren's family is covering most of the costs," he said. "They've been incredibly generous. It's their event as much as it's mine and I can't just—" "Your parents are not her family's responsibility," I said. "They're yours." He was quiet for a moment. "Then I know that. Do you?" He looked at me. There was something working through him. I could see it in the stillness of him, the way stillness in a person who is normally in motion means something is happening internally that isn't ready to be external yet. "I don't know what you want me to do," he said. "I can't restructure her family's budget. I can't add rooms to a resort. I can't." "I haven't asked you to do any of those things," I said. "Then what are you here for?" I looked at him for a moment. My brother, 29 years old, in his tidy apartment, asking me what I was there for. There were things I could have said. There were things I was not yet ready to say. "I'm here because you called Beau," I said. "Don't do that again." I left. He didn't follow me to the door. I walked down the courtyard stairs past the surviving succulents and got in my car and sat there for a minute with my hands on the wheel before I started it, looking at the elm on the street, at the yellow coming in at the tips of the high branches, at the way autumn arrives at the edges of things before it arrives at the center. I sat there longer than I'd planned. Not because I didn't know what to do next. I did know, had known since Wednesday, since the moment the bank representative had confirmed the account structure in the same factual register I used myself for things that didn't need embellishment. I sat there because I was giving Colt one more interval in which to call me back, to come down the stairs and knock on the passenger window, to say something that would make the next steps unnecessary. He didn't come down. I sat with the quiet for another full minute. There was a child on the sidewalk across the street, 5 or 6 years old, working a scooter along the pavement with the effortful concentration that precedes muscle memory, the tongue between teeth focus of someone learning that balance is not a decision you make once, but one you keep making. Her mother was watching from the steps of the building behind her, not close enough to catch her if she fell, close enough to be there when she did. I thought about my mother on the phone, saying she hadn't called because she didn't want to make things harder. I thought about what it cost to hold that sentence in yourself, to love someone so specifically that you make yourself smaller in order not to inconvenience him. To turn your own wanting into something administrative, something to be managed, something that could wait. The child on the scooter wobbled once, caught herself, kept going. I started the car and drove home. I spent Saturday evening at my desk. Not working, not in the professional sense. I had gone to the back of my home office closet and pulled out the old accordion file I'd been keeping for the better part of a decade, a habit formed in my early acquisitions years when I learned that the documents other people treated as administrative background noise were reliably the documents that mattered most when something needed resolving. The file held the architecture of my family's practical life, not everything, but the things I'd been asked to touch over the years, the things that had passed through my hands on the way to being handled. My father's will, updated in 2018. My mother's power of attorney, executed the same year, when she'd had a procedure that turned out to be minor, but had prompted them both to get their paperwork in order, which was the way my father approached everything that frightened him, by making sure the structure was sound. The deed to the house. An insurance summary. And at the back of the file, in a manila folder with a label in my own handwriting, Merit Joint Account / reference copy, a folder I hadn't opened since the tax filing 3 years ago. I reached into the accordion file. I took out the manila folder, set it on the desk, and opened it flat. Inside was a copy of the original account agreement, 4 pages, standard format, dated October 14, 2009. The bank's boilerplate for joint personal checking accounts, but boilerplate is still binding, which is something that people who have never needed to rely on it tend to forget. I had not forgotten it. I had spent a decade in a profession where the weight of a clause depended not on how interesting it was, but on what it controlled. I found the relevant section on page 2. Read it once for comprehension, once more for precision. Joint account holders maintain equal and unrestricted access to all account assets and equal authority to direct account transactions, withdrawals, and transfers, for the life of the account or until such time as both signatories authorize the removal of either party from the account in writing. Both signatories. The removal required both parties to authorize it in writing. One signature was not sufficient. Neither my father nor Colt had ever initiated the paperwork. 14 years of the account running quietly in both their names, neither of them thinking about it, because there had been no reason to think about it until 5 words on a Tuesday afternoon made thinking about it necessary. I set my finger on the line. Read it a 3rd time. Then I turned to the other documents in the file. Not because I needed them tonight, the account agreement was sufficient for what I had already done, but because I had learned in 11 years of acquisitions work that the document you think is the whole case is rarely the whole case. The complete picture lives in the folder, not in the single page you pulled from it. My father's will was standard, estate divided in thirds among the 3 children, with my mother retaining full rights to the house and assets during her lifetime. Power of attorney granted to me in the event of incapacitation, a designation I had signed as witness, back in the summer of 2018, in my parents' kitchen with the notary my father had located through a colleague at the county. I remembered the afternoon. My mother had made iced tea. My father had read every page before signing anything slowly, the way he read everything, and the notary had waited without impatience, which told me she had been doing this long enough to understand that some people sign quickly and some people sign deliberately, and that neither one was wrong. I set the will aside. Looked at the power of attorney again. At the language in section 4, the paragraph establishing scope of authority. And then at the envelope beneath it, letter-sized, unsealed, tucked into the back of the folder against the accordion divider in a way that suggested it had been filed there by someone who understood it to be part of the same category of documents even if they hadn't labeled it the same way. I took out the envelope. Unfolded the single page inside it. A beneficiary designation form, executed in 2018, the same year as the will and the power of attorney. It named me, Dallas and Merritt, as the co-trustee of the family's assets in the event of my father's incapacitation, with authority to act on behalf of both him and my mother in financial matters requiring immediate decision. He had signed it. My mother had signed it. A notary had witnessed it, the same notary I could see from the embossed seal in the lower left corner, the same afternoon, my mother's iced tea and my father reading every page before he signed. I had not thought about this document in 3 years. I had filed it and moved on to the tax question and left it in the accordion file in the back of the closet, the way you leave things you understand to be important even when you can't yet see why. I held it in my hands for a moment. Read it again from the top slowly, the way I read everything I intended to rely on. Then I set it carefully on the desk, face up, beside the account agreement. 2 documents. One from 2009, one from 2018. Together they constituted a structural picture that was considerably more complete than the one Ren had been operating from when she texted me "not my problem" on a Tuesday afternoon, and composed a wedding livestream notification on a Monday evening and organized 42 guests at a Kohala Coast resort, without including the names Wade and Loretta Merritt anywhere in the arrangement. I sat back and looked at the wall above my desk, the pale paint, the shelf of reference binders, the framed photograph of the American River in winter that I'd bought at a small gallery on a quiet Saturday because I'd liked the quality of light in it, the way the water looked silver and absolutely certain of its direction. I put both documents back into the accordion file. Left the file open on the corner of the desk. Turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. The second text from Ren came Monday evening. I had just gotten home from work, was standing in the entryway still holding my keys, jacket half off one shoulder, when the phone buzzed. I checked it there in the entryway in the half-light from the fixture that I kept meaning to put a stronger bulb in. Ren again. The separate thread. Hi Dallas. Wanted to give you a heads up since you're closer to the situation than Presley is. Colt and I have been talking and we actually think it might be better for everyone if your parents watch the ceremony via livestream from home. We're doing a professional feed, it'll be beautiful quality, they'll see everything in real time. Honestly, we think it might be the gentler option for them, given the travel and the expense. They'd be part of the day without any of the stress. I read it standing in the entryway with my keys in one hand. The livestream. The gentler option. The care they were extending, Ren and Colt, in deciding that what would be best for my parents was to watch their son's wedding from their living room in Sacramento on a professional feed while 42 other people stood on volcanic rock above the Pacific. The consideration involved in making that decision for them. The architecture of it, because it was an architecture I could see the load-bearing elements clearly, the way I could see them in any structure I looked at long enough. This was not an accommodation, this was a closure. This was the door being shut and being handed a photograph of the door so you would understand it had been deliberate. I hung my jacket on the hook by the door. I set my keys in the dish on the entryway table. I stood there for another moment, the phone in my hand, the screen still lit. The accordion file was still open on the corner of my desk. The 2 documents still in it. The account agreement on page 2. The co-trustee designation with the notary seal. Ren was flying out of Sacramento International on Thursday. 2 days from now. She had organized every element of this trip, the resort, the room block, the venue, the professional live stream feed for the people who had been quietly moved to the outside of the occasion, and she was boarding that flight with the particular confidence of someone who believes the structure is finished and load-bearing and will hold. She did not know about page 2. She did not know about the 2018 document at the back of the accordion file, the one with the notary seal embossed in the lower left corner, the one that my father had read carefully before signing on the same afternoon. My mother had made iced tea and the notary had waited without impatience. I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Garlic, olive oil, whatever was in the refrigerator that made sense together, my hands going through the motions they knew without instruction while my mind stayed with the text, turning it over, examining it the way I examined every document that was presented to me as final. The garlic went into the pan. The kitchen filled with the smell of it, warm and sharp and grounding, the kind of smell that means a house is occupied, that someone is in it, that something is being made. She thought this was finished. That was what the text communicated beneath its careful wording. Not just the content but the tone of it, the settled quality of someone who has made a decision and is now in the administrative phase, notifying people of the outcome. The livestream text was not an offer. It was a notification. It was Ren telling me what had already been decided while presenting it as a consideration being extended. I moved the pan. Reached for the cutting board. Outside the kitchen window, the evening fog was already coming up from the river, earlier than usual, filling the gaps between the houses with the particular gray-blue of the Sacramento River fog at dusk, which was different from morning fog, heavier, slower to move, the kind that settled in and stayed until well after dark. My phone was on the counter next to the stove. Ren's text on the screen still lit. Thursday. 2 days. I had made my call last Wednesday. I had read the account agreement on Saturday, sat with it, set my finger on the line. I had found the second document, the one I had filed 3 years ago in the back of the accordion file without remembering I had it, the one that changed the structural picture from sufficient to complete. What I had not yet done was use either of them, because the correct moment to use a piece of leverage was not the moment you found it, which was a lesson the acquisitions business taught you early and reinforced constantly. You moved when the movement would be understood. You moved when the other party had fully committed to their position and believed it was unassailable. Ren had fully committed. She had sent the livestream text. She was 2 days from boarding a flight to a wedding she had organized down to the last professional camera angle. She had not left herself any room. I turned the burner down. Picked up the phone. Read the text one final time. The gentler option for them, honestly. I set the phone face down on the counter. I didn't answer. I finished making dinner in the quiet kitchen with the fog pressing at the window, and I thought about my father in the garage light saying never took my name off in the same tone he used for load-bearing fax, and I thought about my mother smoothing the edge of the tablecloth with 2 fingers and not looking up, and I thought about Thursday and the account and the line on page 2, and the document at the back of the accordion file that Ren's father's law firm did not yet know existed. And I thought about what Wednesday had changed and what Thursday was about to. Thursday came the way days come when you've been watching them approach, not faster than usual, just more visibly, each hour arriving with a clarity that ordinary hours don't have. I went to work. I reviewed 2 lease abstracts and sat in on a call about a warehouse acquisition in West Sacramento that had been stalling for 6 weeks over an environmental indemnity clause. I ate lunch at my desk. I answered emails. At 2:17 in the afternoon, I checked the flight tracker on my phone and confirmed that Ren's flight had departed Sacramento International 11 minutes ahead of schedule, which meant she was already in the air, already over the Central Valley or the Sierra foothills, already committed to her altitude and her direction. I put the phone in my desk drawer and finished the afternoon. That evening I called my mother. Not for any specific reason, or not a reason I would have named if she'd asked why I was calling on a Thursday, which she didn't, because my mother had long ago learned not to ask me why I was doing something when I was in the middle of deciding whether to tell her. She sounded tired. Not the tired of having done too much, but the particular tired of having thought too much, of having turned something over so many times that the turning itself had become exhausting. "Have you talked to Colt this week?" I asked. "He texted," she said. "A photo of the venue." "Did you respond?" A pause. "I sent a heart," she said. I thought about my mother, 61 years old, sending a heart emoji to a photograph of the place where her son's wedding would happen without her. The precision of that response, how much it communicated and how little it asked for in return. "Mom," I said. "I'm fine, Dallas." "I know you are." She stopped. I heard her exhale, slow and controlled, the way she exhaled when she was editing something out of what she'd been about to say. "I bought a fig preserve for Ren. For a wedding gift. I've been putting it up all summer, the good batch, and I thought," another pause. "I don't know what I thought." I didn't say anything. I let the silence sit between us on the line, warm and undemanding. "It's a good batch," she said finally. "The best in probably 4 years." "She'll get it," I said. My mother didn't answer that directly. She asked me if I'd eaten dinner and I told her I had, which was true, and she told me the rosemary was going wild in the garden and she was going to have to cut it back before it took over the pepper bed, and we talked about the garden for another 10 minutes, the way we sometimes did when we needed to talk about something else entirely. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a while without turning on any additional lights, the room lit only by the fixture over the stove, which I'd left on. The fog was at the window again. It had been at the window every evening that week, reliable as a tide. I thought about the preserve. The best batch in 4 years, packed for a wedding gift, wrapped in a dish towel, sitting on my mother's counter waiting for a trip that she did not yet know she was going to make. I picked up my phone. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. "I need to come over tomorrow morning," I said. "Before work. 7 o'clock. "I'll have coffee on," he said. "There's one more document I want to show you," I said. "Something I found in the accordion file on Saturday." A pause. Not a long one, just the half-second of a man recalibrating the weight of a conversation he'd thought he already understood. "Is it something I need to be concerned about?" he asked. "It's something that changes the picture," I said. "For the better. But you should see it before we do anything with it." 7 o'clock, he said. I said goodnight. I set the phone on the counter. Through the window the fog was deep and settled now, the street entirely absorbed into it, the shapes of the houses visible only as suggestions of themselves, as structural outlines without detail. I went back to the desk. I took the accordion file off the corner. I opened it and took out the account agreement, page 2, the joint holder clause, and laid it on the desk. Then I reached in again and took out the envelope with the co-trustee designation, the notary-sealed page, the document from 2018 that changed the question from whether my father had acted with legitimate authority to whether anyone opposing him had understood the full scope of what they were opposing. I set them side by side on the desk. 2 pieces of paper. One from 2009, one from 2018. Together they constituted something that a competent attorney would recognize immediately, and a pressure tactic letter would not survive. "Understood," I said quietly to no one. I let the words land like a period, not a comma. Then I put both documents carefully back into the file, turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. Colt called on Sunday. I was at my parents' house for dinner. Lamb that my father had been planning since Wednesday, a slow-cooked thing with preserved lemon and olives, the kind of meal he made when he wanted to put his hands to something that required patience and produce something worth the time. My mother had made bread. The table was set the way it was always set, the same cream-colored placemats, the same water glasses that had been in the cabinet since before I was born. We were midway through the meal when my phone buzzed on the counter behind me. I glanced at the screen. "Colt." I set the phone face down. "You can answer it," my father said. "I'll call him back," I said. My father looked at me for a moment across the table, a look that held several things in it and released none of them. He picked up his fork and went back to his plate. The phone buzzed again 20 minutes later, while I was helping my mother with the dishes. I dried my hands on the towel by the sink and called him back from the back porch, the door pulled mostly closed behind me, the garden dark and cool and smelling of rosemary and the wet clay smell of the soil after my mother had watered. "You've been avoiding me," Colt said. "I've been busy," I said. "Dallas." His voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it often, a tightness, not quite there yet, something that was still finding its direction. "I need to talk to you about something." "Okay," I said. "Ren called me from Hawaii. She said she went to check the joint account. She manages the transfers for the vendor deposits, and there were some transactions she didn't recognize." I looked at the garden. The fig tree was a dark shape against the darker shape of the fence, its leaves gone still in the evening air. "What kind of transactions?" I said. "2 transfers out," he said. "Wednesday and Friday. She said she didn't authorize them and I didn't authorize them and she wants to know what happened." "Did she call the bank?" I asked. "She's calling them tomorrow morning," he said. "Dallas, did you do something?" I didn't answer immediately. Somewhere in the neighbor's yard a sprinkler system kicked on, a mechanical click followed by the soft percussion of water hitting dry grass. "I need you to tell me if you did something," Colt said. His voice had tightened another degree. "Tell me what the transfers were," I said. A pause. Then, $2,300 Wednesday. $1,400 and change Friday. To an account Ren doesn't recognize. I let the numbers sit between us. "Colt," I said. "You need to talk to Dad." Silence on the line. A long one. When Colt spoke again his voice had passed through the tightness and come out the other side into something quieter and more dangerous. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question this time. "Talk to Dad," I said. "He can explain the account structure." I went back inside. My mother looked at me from the sink. I picked up the dish towel and went back to drying without explaining, and she didn't ask, and we finished the dishes in a silence that was not uncomfortable, only full. The call from Ren came on Tuesday morning at 7:44. I was in my car in the parking garage at work, engine off, reviewing notes on my phone for the 9 o'clock. The structure above me was concrete, 3 levels of it, the kind of parking structure that exists in every mid-sized city in the Central Valley, built in the 1980s and maintained without sentiment, the fluorescent fixtures humming at a frequency just low enough to be felt rather than heard. I had backed into the space the way I always did out of habit, the habit of the acquisitions work, always positioned to leave without having to maneuver. I answered. I want to know what you did. Her voice was flat and sharp, the way a surface is sharp when something has been stripped from it. Good morning, Ren, I said. Don't. A pause. The bank told me the transfers were authorized by a joint account holder. Wade Merritt. Your father. Who I have never met in person and who has never touched that account in the entire time Colt and I have been together. So I want to know what you did, and I want to know right now. My father is a joint account holder, I said. He's been on the account since 2009. He's never been removed. That account is Colt's account. It's a joint account, I said. Both names are on the agreement. You can request a copy of the original documents from the bank if you'd like to verify. A silence. Shorter than I expected. When her voice came back, it had shifted, the flat sharpness replaced by something with more force behind it, something that had found its direction. You went behind our backs, she said. You went to your father, you fed him information, and you used an account that hasn't been active for years to interfere in our finances. Do you understand how serious that is? The account has been active continuously, I said. Colt uses it for regular transfers. Your vendor deposits, you said. That is not the point. The account agreement gives both holders full authority, I said. My father exercised that authority. That's not interference. That's the account working exactly as it was structured. You manipulated an old man? My father is 63, I said. He's a licensed civil engineer. He read the account agreement before he authorized anything. He understood exactly what he was doing. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear background sound on her end, a hotel corridor maybe, or a lobby, the soft ambient noise of a large air-conditioned space. A place that had been chosen carefully. A place that had been organized down to the last detail, for 42 people, not 44. I want that money back, she said. In the account by tomorrow. The money covered 2 round-trip flights from Sacramento to Kona, I said. And 4 nights at a hotel 12 minutes from your resort. My parents fly out Wednesday morning. They'll be at the wedding. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It had a different weight to it, the weight of something that has been constructed carefully over a long period of time, suddenly discovering that the ground it was built on was not what it appeared to be. You had no right, Ren said. Her voice had dropped. It was quieter now, which made it carry more. My parents have every right to attend their son's wedding, I said. Colt didn't want, she stopped. Restarted. This isn't your decision to make. You made it my decision, I said, when you texted me that it wasn't your problem. There was a beat. I could hear the hotel ambient behind her, faint voices somewhere down a corridor, the low hum of air conditioning in a large building, the sound of a place running at full capacity, all its logistics in motion. This is Colt's money, she said. It's his account. It's a joint account, I said. The agreement is 4 pages. Your father's firm has the account number. They can request a copy from the bank and verify the joint holder language themselves. You are deliberately. I'm describing what the document says, I said. If the document says something different from what you believed, that's worth knowing. But the document doesn't change based on what either of us believed. A silence. Then something different in her voice, not surrender, not agreement, but the particular quality of someone who has tried 2 angles and found them both solid and is deciding where to try the third. Your father has never exercised any authority over that account, she said. Not once in 5 years. The only reason he's touching it now is because you put him up to it. My father read the account agreement and made a legal decision, I said. He is 63 years old and has been a licensed civil engineer for 35 years. He is fully capable of reading a document and acting on it. With information you provided? Yes, I said. I told him the flights were not arranged and the hotel room block did not include him. That is the information I provided. He already knew about the account. Another silence. Longer than the previous ones. I waited. This is not how families handle things, she said. Her voice had found a new register now, quieter, more controlled, the voice of someone who has decided to make one final direct argument before the deliberate placement. You could have come to us. You could have asked. You chose to go around us instead. I texted Colt, I said. He told me you had a system. I went to his apartment. He asked me what I was there for. I told him not to send our uncle to manage our father's feelings. At every point I gave him the chance to handle it. He handed every hard thing to you and you handed it off the edge of the table. A pause. Then her voice came back and it had found something, not the flat sharpness from the beginning of the call, not the quieter dropping register, but a third thing, a controlled and deliberate thing, the voice of someone who has decided to say the thing they've been thinking since before the conversation started. Your parents were never part of this wedding, she said. They were never going to be part of this wedding. This is mine and Colt's day and your family, your father and your mother, they have made every family event about their feelings for years. That ends here. The money goes back in the account and your parents stay home and watch the live stream, and if you push this any further I will make sure Colt understands exactly what kind of person you are. I sat in the parking garage. Concrete above me, concrete on three sides, the fluorescent lights buzzing at a frequency just low enough to be felt rather than heard. My hands were in my lap. My voice when I spoke was even. Are you finished? I said. Your parents were never part of this wedding. Her voice was precise. Deliberate. Each word placed exactly where she meant to place it. Remember that. The line went quiet. She hadn't hung up, I could still hear the ambient sound of the hotel space behind her. I waited. I'll talk to Colt, she said finally. And when I'm done talking to him, you are going to fix this. I didn't answer what she'd said. I let the line run quiet for a few seconds, long enough for her to understand that I'd heard her and that I was not going to be moved by the hearing of it. She hung up. I set the phone in the cup holder. Sat for a moment with my hands loose in my lap, looking through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking level ahead of me, the painted surface, the faint oil stains in the lanes, a numbered space stenciled in yellow that had been touched up at some point and done imprecisely, the new paint overlapping the old. I was aware of my own breathing. Measured. The way it always was after a call that had required containment. I thought about what she had said. About the structure of it, the two clauses she had delivered, the first designed to close a door and the second designed to make sure I understood the door had been closed on purpose. Your parents were never part of this wedding. Each word placed. Deliberate. The kind of statement a person delivers when they have been sitting with it for long enough that the delivery has become rehearsed. I had heard that sentence before. Not from her, from Colt in his apartment, the afternoon I'd told him not to send Bo again. He hadn't said it then, not in those words. But I had heard the shape of it in everything he'd deflected that day, in every we can't restructure and I can't add rooms. I had heard it in the way he'd stepped back from each hard thing and handed it across the table to Ren, who had picked up each one and carried it until the weight of all of them had given her a position she believed was solid. It wasn't solid. She didn't yet know that. I picked up my phone. Checked the time. 7:51. I had 8 minutes before I needed to be in the building. I thought about calling my father, decided against it. There was nothing to tell him yet that would help him, and he was not a man who needed to be updated on increments. He needed the complete picture when it was complete. I got out of the car and walked into the building. Colt called 4 hours later. I was at my desk, door open, the 9 o'clock long finished, working through a title search on a property in Napa that had 3 layers of easement complications and required the kind of concentrated attention that made everything else go quiet. He didn't start with hello. How could you do this? Not a question, a statement, flat and absolute, delivered in a voice I hadn't heard from him in years, maybe ever, the voice that came from somewhere past frustration and past the rawness of it into the place where a person has decided they are simply right. Colt, I said. Do you have any idea what you've put Ren through? She's been crying for 2 hours. She's in Hawaii, Dallas. She's supposed to be planning the last week before her wedding, and instead she spent her morning on the phone with the bank trying to figure out why money is missing from her account. The account is in Dad's name, I said. It's our account. Legally it is not, I said. It is a joint account with 2 holders. Dad is one of them. He has been for 16 years. That is not a technicality, it's the structure of the account. You know that account was supposed to be Colt's? I know what it was supposed to be, I said. I also know what it is. You went behind our backs. His voice had risen now, moved into the register that doesn't calculate anymore, the one that just moves. You went to Dad, you told him about the account, you used him to get at our money, and now you're sitting there acting like this was some legal procedure. I'm sitting here, I said, because your fiancé told me your parents could figure it out themselves and now they have flights and a hotel. Silence. A hard one. That money goes back, he said. The flights are booked, I said. Non-refundable. The hotel is booked. I don't care. Mom and Dad are coming to your wedding, Colt. My voice was quiet. I kept it there. That's what happened. A long pause. When he came back, his voice had shed the momentum and replaced it with something that was trying to sound final. You should know, he said, that Ren has talked to her father. Her father is a real estate attorney in Portland. He's looking at what you did and whether it constitutes unauthorized use of funds or financial interference. So if you think you handled this cleanly, you might want to talk to someone. I let that land. Her father is welcome to read the account agreement, I said. Page 2. The joint holder clause. Colt's breathing on the line was audible. When he spoke again, his voice had gone somewhere new, lower, slower, the voice of someone saying the thing they've been saving for the right moment. You have always done this, he said. You've always thought you knew better than everyone else. You've always positioned yourself as the responsible one, the one who holds everything together, and the truth is you just can't stand not being in control. This isn't about Mom and Dad. This is about you, Dallas. It's always been about you. I sat with that for a moment. There was something in it, I was honest enough with myself to know that. The question of where competence ended and the need to be the one who handled things began was not a question I had fully resolved about myself, and I was not going to pretend otherwise, not even privately, not even when I was sitting across from a version of myself I didn't entirely like. But I also knew what Ren's text had said. And I knew what my mother's face had looked like across the dinner table, smoothing the tablecloth with 2 fingers. I'll see you in Hawaii, I said. Mom and Dad were never supposed to be at this wedding, he said. Each word separate and placed with care, the same way Ren had placed her words that morning in the parking garage. Whatever you think you've fixed, you haven't fixed it. You've just made it worse. Remember that. I didn't answer. The line went quiet. He was still on it. I could hear him breathing, measured, waiting, the particular quality of silence a person makes when they're holding a position and expecting you to crack it. Waiting for something he could use. I let the line run. Then, safe flight, I said. And hung up. I set the phone on the desk. I sat for a moment with my hands flat on the surface in front of me, looking at the title search documents I'd been working through before the call. The easement complications on the Napa property, 3 layers of recorded encumbrances going back to 1987, the kind of paperwork that told you everything about a property's history if you were willing to read it slowly. I picked up my pen. I recapped it once. Then I set it down and went to get coffee, because the morning had been long and the afternoon was going to be longer and there was still work to do. When I came back, I stood at the window for a moment with the mug in my hand, looking out at the Sacramento afternoon, the particular quality of October light in the valley, the way it came down through the thinning leaves on the oak across the street and scattered on the sidewalk in overlapping shapes that shifted when the breeze moved. I thought about Colt on the phone. About the version of that sentence he'd delivered, each word separate and placed with care, the same precision Ren had used that morning. 2 people carrying the same sentence. A position they'd agreed to hold passed between them until it had become the shape of what they believed. I thought about what it would feel like to be the one who had built that position, to have organized everything around it, the venue, the resort, the room block, the professional live stream feed, and to find out 9 days before the wedding that the structure had a door in it you hadn't known was there. I drank the coffee. I went back to the title search. The afternoon passed the way afternoons pass when you have something to wait for, not slowly, just with more texture than usual, each hour distinct. My father called that evening. Not about the confrontation, he didn't know the specifics of either call, what Ren had said in the parking garage or what Colt had said 4 hours later. He called because he had received a letter. Hand-delivered, he said. This afternoon. To the house. From who? I asked. A law firm. Portland address. He read it to me slowly, the way he read anything official, each word given its full weight, nothing skipped, the habit of a man who had spent decades reading specifications and understanding that the word you skim is always the word that matters. The letter was from the firm of a Portland real estate attorney. It was addressed to Wade Merritt and informed him that his recent transactions involving the joint checking account held in his name and the name of Colton James Merritt were under review for potential unauthorized use of funds, and that Mr. Merritt should be aware that legal remedies including injunctive relief and civil damages were being considered by the account's co-holder and his legal representatives. It requested that Mr. Merritt refrain from further transactions involving the account pending resolution of the matter. My father read the whole thing without stopping. When he finished, there was a silence on the line. "Dad," I said. "I'm not worried about it," he said. His voice was steady. Not the steadiness of someone suppressing something, the steadiness of a man who has read enough documents in his life to know the difference between a letter designed to frighten and a letter with actual teeth. "You shouldn't be," I said. "The account agreement is clear. You're a joint holder. You had full authority." "I know I did," he said. "I read what you showed me before I signed anything." "I know you did." A pause. Then, "Dallas, is there something else I should know about?" I thought about that for a moment. About what he was asking and what was behind the asking. My father was not a man who asked questions without having already formed a hypothesis. He had read the account agreement on Saturday morning at the kitchen table with his coffee and his precision and his 30-year habit of reading documents until they yielded their full meaning. He had nodded once at the co-trustee designation and said, "I don't believe they know it exists." He had called Harlan Osgood within the hour and had called me back that afternoon. He had been running the same calculations I had in parallel from a different vantage point, and now he was asking me whether there was anything else in the accordion file. "There might be one more document," I said. "Something I want to show you before Wednesday." "Come for breakfast," he said. 7 o'clock. I arrived at my parents' house at 6:55. My father was already in the kitchen, coffee made, the table cleared of everything except 2 mugs and a small plate of the sourdough my mother had sliced and buttered. My mother was in the garden. I could see her through the kitchen window, moving along the rosemary bed with a pair of shears, working in the early light with the focused attention she brought to everything she tended. The garden was still green this late in the year, still producing. The tomatoes were mostly finished, but the rosemary ran thick and dense along the south bed, and the fig tree at the far end of the garden stood in the early light with its upper branches gone still, the fruit long since harvested, the leaves beginning to yellow at the tips in the way of things that have done what they were made to do. I had the accordion file with me. I set it on the table and opened it. I reached in and took out the manila folder, the one with the account agreement, and set it to one side. Then I reached in again and took out a second folder, thinner, labeled in my handwriting from 5 years ago, Merit/property/reference. I unfolded it slowly. Inside were 3 documents clipped together: a copy of the deed to my parents' house current, a property tax assessment from 2021, and underneath those a single page I had printed from the county assessor's website the previous evening, which showed the current assessed value of the property at 2847 River Bend Court, Sacramento, the Craftsman House 2 blocks from the river, where my parents had lived for 31 years. I laid it flat on the table between us. My father looked at it. He picked up his coffee and drank from it without looking away from the page. "You pulled the assessment," he said. "Last night," I said. "I wanted to know where things stood." The assessed value on the page was $840,000. The house they had bought in 1993 for $212,000, which my father had maintained and improved with the same patient attention he brought to everything structural, which sat on a lot that had appreciated with the neighborhood over 3 decades, was now worth more than 4 times what they'd paid for it, against a mortgage that had been paid off in 2019. My father looked at the number the way he looked at things he had always known were approximately true but had never seen stated precisely, not surprised exactly but settled, the way a number that confirms an estimate settles. He set down the coffee. He read the line a second time. "That's not all," I said. I reached into the accordion file a third time. This one was not a folder, it was an envelope, letter-sized, unsealed, that I had found in my parents' filing cabinet 3 years ago when I'd been helping my father locate his insurance documents, and which he had told me at the time to keep a copy of because he wasn't sure where his copy had gone. I had kept it. I had filed it without thinking much about it at the time, in the back of the accordion file against the divider, in the same category as the other things I filed because I understood them to matter even when I couldn't yet see why. I took it out, unfolded the single page inside it slowly, feeling the paper, heavier stock than printer paper, the kind used for legal documents, with a notary seal embossed in the lower left corner. I laid it flat beside the assessment printout. My father looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, a slight settling, a recognition, the particular quality of a man identifying something he had signed and remembering the afternoon he signed it. It was a beneficiary designation form, executed in 2018, the same year he'd updated his will. It named me, Dallas and Merritt, as the co-trustee of the family's assets in the event of his incapacitation, with authority to act on behalf of both him and my mother in financial matters requiring immediate decision. He had signed it. My mother had signed it. A notary had witnessed it, the same notary from the same afternoon, the embossed seal in the lower left corner confirming it. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't fill the silence. Outside, through the kitchen window, my mother had moved from the rosemary bed to the fig tree. She was standing underneath it with the shears at her side, her head tilted back to assess the upper branches, the ones that were getting into the neighbor's light. She stood there for a long moment, just looking, the way she stood in front of anything she was about to make a decision about. Then she raised the shears and began. "Dad," I said. "Did Wren's father's firm look at this document?" My father set down his coffee. He looked at the beneficiary designation form for a moment, then at the assessment printout beside it, then at the original account agreement in its manila folder at the edge of the table. 3 pieces of paper. 3 different years. A structure built slowly and maintained the way my father maintained everything, without announcement, without asking to be noticed, simply because the structure existed and structures required maintenance. "I don't believe they know it exists," he said. "I don't believe they do either," I said. We sat with that for a moment. Through the window, my mother's shears were moving in slow, clean cuts, the kind of pruning that looked simple and required knowing exactly where to cut. "The letter from the Portland firm," I said. "They're arguing unauthorized use. They don't know about the co-trustee designation. They built the argument on the assumption that you're just a forgotten name on a checking account, that the authority you exercised was incidental rather than structural." My father nodded once. He understood. He was a man who had spent a career understanding the difference between incidental and structural, who had written the phrase in specifications and project briefs and county review documents until it had become part of how he thought. Incidental meant it could have gone another way. Structural meant it was load-bearing and had been designed that way from the beginning. "You need a response letter," I said. "Not from me, from an attorney. Someone who can attach both documents and make the argument clearly." "I know someone," he said. I looked at him. "Retired now," he said. "County counsel for 12 years before that. He owes me a conversation." He picked up his coffee again. "I'll call him this morning." He said it with the same flatness he used for everything he intended to actually do, which was a different flatness from the one he used for things he was acknowledging. I had learned the distinction a long time ago. This one meant it was already decided. Outside, my mother had finished with the fig tree and moved back toward the rosemary bed, the shears still in her hand, examining something at the base of the plants that required closer inspection. The early light was stronger now, the fog fully gone, the garden clear and specific in the way it only was on days without overcast, each plant itself, each line of the fence behind it its own line, nothing softened by diffusion. "When do you fly out?" I asked. "Wednesday morning," he said. 6:45. "I'll drive you to the airport," I said. He looked at me across the table. At the accordion file open between us. At the 3 documents laid out on the cleared surface of the kitchen table where the family had eaten for 28 years. "Your mother's already packed," he said. "She packed Monday." Something moved through my chest then, not a named thing, just a physical thing, a tightening and then a releasing that happened below the level of language. My mother had packed on Monday. Before the phone calls, before the Portland letter, before Harlan Osgood and the response letter that hadn't been written yet. She had packed because I had told her they were going and she had believed me and she had packed. I didn't say anything. My father picked up the assessment printout. He read it once more, the way he read things he intended to keep, not to absorb new information but to confirm what he'd already absorbed and make the knowing permanent. Then he refolded it, set it back with the others, and closed the accordion file. The attorney's name was Harlan Osgood. He had practiced county law for 22 years and had retired to a house in Rancho Cordova with a woodshop and a vegetable garden and, apparently, a continuing willingness to read documents for people he respected. He called my father back within the hour. My father called me that afternoon from the garage. I could hear the faint background of it, the work lamp, the particular acoustic of a concrete space with a high ceiling and a truck in the middle of it, the sounds of a space where my father went when he needed to think with his hands. Harlan says the Portland letter is a pressure tactic, he said. Standard intimidation format. No motion filed, no case number, no actual legal proceeding initiated. Just a letter on firm letterhead designed to make the recipient feel like something serious has already started. That's what I thought, I said. He's drafting a response, my father said. 2 pages. He's attaching the account agreement, page 2, the joint holder clause, and the co-trustee designation. He says once the other firm sees the co-trustee document they'll understand the legal position clearly and the letter will stop. When does he send it? Tomorrow morning, my father said. Certified mail and email simultaneously. I wrote that down. Tomorrow morning. Harlan Osgood, certified mail, 2 pages, both documents attached. The account agreement establishing that my father's authority over the account was legitimate and continuous. The co-trustee designation establishing that my role in directing that authority was not interference but exercise of a documented fiduciary function. Together, they answered the Portland letter completely. Not partially, not probably, completely. I had read enough contract disputes in my professional life to know when a counterargument had no viable surface to attach to. There was a pause on the line. I want to tell you something, my father said. I waited. Your mother asked me this morning why you came to the garage on Tuesday. What happened that made you come over without calling? I told her about the texts, the shape of it, the same as what I told you, not the exact words. He paused. The work lamp hummed in the background. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she went to the closet and got her carry-on and started packing. I didn't say anything. She put the fig preserves in first, he said. The good batch. Before anything else. I stood at my kitchen counter with the phone against my ear and the afternoon light coming through the window at the low angle it came at in October, and I did not fill the silence. Dad, I said finally. Yeah. I'll be there at 5:45. I know you will, he said. The call from Ren came Wednesday morning at 10:43 Hawaii time, which was 12:43 in Sacramento. I was at the airport, 20 minutes back from dropping my parents at departures. I had watched them move through the sliding doors with their luggage, my father in the gray travel shirt he wore every time he flew anywhere, moving with the deliberate unhurried pace of a man who has been early to everything for 63 years and sees no reason to change that now. My mother with the carry-on she'd owned for 15 years, the navy one with the broken zipper pull she'd replaced with a keychain from Carmel. She had paused at the doors for a moment before they opened, not looking back at me, looking ahead, at whatever was through the glass, at whatever came next. I had watched them until the doors closed. I was sitting in the parking structure now, engine off, not yet ready to drive back to work. Through the parking structure's open side I could see the flight operations area, the tarmac, the service vehicles, and above it all the flat blue of the October sky, a plane climbing out of Sacramento International in the distance, gaining altitude over the flat valley, banking south. The phone rang. Ren. Not a text this time. A call. I answered. My father's firm got a letter this morning. Her voice was different from Tuesday's call. The controlled precision was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, a tightness that hadn't been in it before, a quality of someone who has received information that has changed the dimensions of the room they thought they were standing in. I know, I said. You have a co-trustee designation, she said. Over your parents' assets. Yes, I said. You didn't mention that. You didn't ask, I said. A silence. Through the parking structure's open side I could see the plane from before, reduced now to a point of light above the valley's edge, banking south. Moving at the altitude it had chosen and committed to. That document changes the legal picture, she said. My father's firm says. Your father's firm sent a pressure letter, I said. There's no filed motion. There's no case. There's a letter on letterhead and now there's a response. Another silence. Longer. Ren, I said. My parents are on a plane. The silence that followed was different from all the previous ones. It was the silence of someone doing arithmetic, not emotional arithmetic, actual arithmetic, the kind where you count what you have against what you thought you had and find the columns don't match. I heard her breath shift on the line, a small thing, just the change in how air moves through a person when the calculation they've been running comes back with a different answer than expected. What do you mean they're on a plane? She said. Their flight left at 6:45 this morning, I said. They land in Kona at 11:15 your time. I booked them a rental car. The hotel is 12 minutes from your resort. I heard her breathing on the line. Measured, controlled, the way a person breathes when they are deciding what to do with something that cannot be undone. Colt doesn't know, she said. It wasn't a question. I imagine he'll find out when they land, I said. She stopped. When she started again, her voice had gone somewhere I hadn't heard it go before. Past the precision, past the controlled flatness, into a register that was genuinely unsteady, the voice of someone whose structure has just revealed itself to be load-bearing in a place they hadn't accounted for. You did all of this. The account, the attorney, the co-trustee document, you had all of this ready. I had the documents, I said. They've existed for years. I just read them. This is not over, she said. Her voice had found its footing again, quiet, deliberate, each word placed the way she placed everything, with the intention of it being remembered. Whatever you think you've accomplished, you've put your parents in the middle of something that is going to follow them. This isn't finished. Mom and Dad were never supposed to be at this wedding. Whatever you think you've fixed, you haven't fixed it. You've just made it worse. Remember that. The plane I'd been watching had cleared the valley's edge and was gone, reduced to a glint and then to nothing. I held the phone against my ear. Ren was still on the line. I could hear the background of wherever she was, the resort, the ocean beyond it, the soft ambient sound of a place that had been chosen carefully and was beautiful and had been organized down to the last detail. My parents were 40 minutes into their flight. My mother had packed on Monday. The fig preserves were in her carry-on, wrapped in a dish towel, because she had decided she was giving them to Ren regardless, because that was who my mother was. I let the silence on the line sit. I didn't fill it. I counted the pause instead of answering it, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set in motion, and because the moment had its own weight and I was not going to subtract from it by rushing. Then I said, "Safe travels, Ren." And I hung up. I sat in the parking structure for a moment longer, looking at the place where the plane had been. The sky was clear and still and absolutely itself, the blue of it deep and uniform, the kind of sky that Sacramento got in October when the marine layer had pulled back completely and everything settled into what it actually was. I started the car and drove back to work. My parents landed in Kona at 11:20, 5 minutes behind schedule. I know because my mother texted me from the gate. A single message, a photograph of the tarmac through the airplane window, the volcanic rock visible at the edge of the runway, black and ancient against the bright Pacific light. No caption. Just the photograph. I looked at it for a long time at my desk in Sacramento, at the quality of the light in it, the way it came down flat and clear and without the diffusion the Central Valley fog put into everything, and I thought about my mother taking that photograph and deciding it was the thing she wanted to send me. Not words, not an update, just this, light and rock and the edge of a runway and the fact of arrival. I texted back, "Welcome to Hawaii." She sent a heart. Then your father already found the rental car. He's very pleased with himself. I put the phone in my desk drawer and went back to work. I thought about them in the rental car, navigating the Kohala Coast Road in the direction of the hotel that was 12 minutes from the resort. My father would have studied the map before they left Sacramento. He would have a mental model of the route, exits, landmarks, the approximate travel time at posted speed. My mother would be looking at the landscape out the passenger window, at the volcanic rock and the ocean and the quality of Pacific light that was different from anything the Central Valley produced, and she would be quiet in the way she was quiet when something was working through her that she wanted to keep for herself before she said it out loud. She had packed on Monday. Before any of this was certain. I stayed at my desk until the work was done. Colt called at 2 in the afternoon Hawaii time. Noon in Sacramento. I was eating lunch at my desk, the habit of a person who works through things by staying at the desk, when the phone rang and his name came up. I answered. "They're here," he said. "I know," I said. A silence. Not the hard silence of the confrontation calls, something different, a silence with more give in it, the kind that comes after a person has spent several hours absorbing something and has arrived at a place that isn't resolution, but isn't active combat either. "Mom cried when she saw me at the hotel," he said. "In the lobby. She came through the door and she saw me and she cried." I didn't say anything. "I didn't know she was going to do that," he said. His voice had something in it I hadn't heard in it in a long time. Something younger than the voice he'd been using all week. "She packed on Monday," I said. As soon as I told her they were going. Another silence. "Ren is," he stopped. Started again. "Ren is not okay right now. I need you to understand that. She feels like everything was taken out of her hands and she worked so hard on this, Anne." "I know she's not okay," I said. "Are you going to apologize to her?" I thought about that for a moment. About what an apology would be for, what action it would be naming, what harm I would be acknowledging. I thought about the text in the parking garage. Not my problem. I thought about the livestream. The gentler option for them, honestly. I thought about Ren's voice on Wednesday morning saying the exit words that Colt had said first, both of them carrying the same sentence like a position they'd agreed to hold, the position having passed between them until neither of them could clearly remember who had started holding it first. "No," I said. Colt was quiet. "I'm not going to apologize for getting Mom and Dad on a plane to your wedding," I said. "If Ren wants to have a conversation after, when things are calmer, I'll have it. But not as an apology." He didn't push it. That was something. He could have pushed it and he didn't, which told me that somewhere in the last few hours, watching my mother cry in a hotel lobby, something had shifted in the way he was holding the situation. "The rehearsal dinner is tonight," he said. Dallas, I don't know how to do tonight." "Yes you do," I said. "It's going to be uncomfortable." "Yes," I said. "It is. Do it anyway." A long pause. Then, quietly, "Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you come to me first before all of this?" I sat with that question. It was a fair question. It deserved a real answer. "I did come to you," I said. "I texted you about the flights. You told me Ren had a system. I went to your apartment. You asked me what I was there for. I told you not to send Bo again. At every point, Colt, I gave you the chance to handle it." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Through my office window, the Sacramento afternoon was doing the thing it did in October when the fog was gone, sharp and clear and more itself than usual, the leaves on the oak across the street fully yellow now, the light moving through them at the low angle that made everything look like it was being examined carefully by something that wanted to understand it. "I know," he said finally. 2 words, quiet and flat and carrying more weight than they appeared to. Not a concession and not a surrender, something more like the beginning of an accounting. "Go to your rehearsal dinner," I said. "Be with Mom and Dad. That's all you have to do tonight." We hung up. I finished my lunch. Outside the window, the Sacramento afternoon was clear. No fog, the kind of dry, bright day the valley got in the fall when the marine layer pulled back and everything looked more defined than usual, edges sharp, colors more themselves. The wedding was on a Saturday. My parents called me that morning before the ceremony, early Sacramento time, before 6, my father's voice coming through the phone in the particular register he used when he was moved and intended not to show it, which meant he was showing it anyway. "Your mother looks beautiful," he said. "I know she does," I said. She wore the blue dress. The one from Presley's graduation. I knew the dress. Navy, fitted at the waist, the one my mother had bought for an occasion and had been finding occasions for ever since because it was the kind of dress that justified itself. I could picture it precisely, the way it sat at her waist, the way she stood differently in it than she stood in her garden clothes or her Sunday dinner clothes, the way she carried herself when she was dressed for something she had decided mattered. "Dad," I said. "Yeah. I'm glad you're there." A silence. The kind my father made when something had reached him past the place where he kept things that had reached him. A long one. The weight of it familiar and specific, the silence of a man who has more to say than he is going to say and knows it, and has made peace with the gap. "Me too," he said. We hung up. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and stood at the window for a while. The early Sacramento light was coming in at the low autumn angle, still cool, the fig tree in my parents' garden invisible from here, but present in the way that things are present when you know exactly where they are. I thought about my mother in the navy dress and my father in the gray suit on a ceremony lawn above the Pacific. I thought about what it meant to be in a photograph that you almost weren't in. I thought about what the camera would see from 40 feet away and what it would miss, which is what cameras always miss. The weight of the morning before it, the packed carry-on and the 5:45 departure and the heart emoji sent from a gate at Sacramento International on a Wednesday. I thought about what Colt had said on the phone on Tuesday. You've always thought you knew better than everyone else, you've always positioned yourself. And I turned it over the way you turn things over when they have enough truth in them to require honest examination. There was something in it. I was not going to pretend otherwise. The question of where competence ended and the need to control outcomes began was not a question I had fully resolved about myself, and I intended to keep being the kind of person who asked it rather than the kind who stopped. But my parents were in Hawaii. In the navy dress and the gray suit. And that was not nothing. I poured more coffee and sat with it at the kitchen table until the light shifted and the ceremony time arrived and passed. I did not check my phone. I sat in the kitchen in Sacramento and let the ceremony happen on the other side of the Pacific without trying to reach across it, because some things need the room they need and reaching across them collapses the distance in a way that doesn't help anyone. The ceremony would have started at 4:30 their time, which was 6:30 in Sacramento. I sat at the table at 6:30 with the coffee going cold and thought about what the light looked like on the big island in the late afternoon, the gold horizontal quality of it, the way it moved across volcanic rock and made everything look deliberate, chosen, composed on purpose. My parents in the ceremony chairs or standing near the edge of the lawn, depending on the seating arrangement. My father in the gray suit straight-backed, the posture of a man who had attended important things his whole life and understood that attending them well meant being entirely present to them. My mother in the navy dress, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on her son. Colt at the front of it. Looking at Ren coming toward him. I thought about who he had been when he was 12, which was the age at which I had decided I would protect him from whatever I could. Not from hardship, you couldn't and shouldn't protect people from hardship. But from the specific kind of abandonment that looks like nothing, that wears the face of logistics and practicality and having a vision for the day. The kind that says we thought it would be better for you without ever asking. The light in the kitchen moved. 6:45. 6:50. I picked up the coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway because my mother had taught me not to waste things, which is a different lesson from the one it sounds like. I imagined them standing on volcanic rock above the Pacific while I sat in Sacramento with a cold mug, which was exactly what needed to happen and was not the same as not being part of it. The photographs arrived in the family group text that evening. My parents on the ceremony lawn, the ocean behind them, the light doing exactly what Big Island light does in the late afternoon, going gold and horizontal, the kind of light that makes every photograph look like it was taken on purpose. My father in his gray suit, the one he wore to anything he considered important. My mother in the navy dress, her hair up, something in her expression that was happiness but more specific than that, the particular satisfaction of having been somewhere you were afraid you might not get to be, and finding that it was exactly what you'd hoped. There was one photograph of all four of them. Colt and Ren in the center, my parents on either side. Ren was looking at the camera. Her expression was composed and careful and not unkind, not warm, not the laughing expression from the venue walk-through photograph, but not hostile either. The expression of a person who has decided that composed is what today gets and is holding to that decision with both hands. My mother had her hand on Colt's arm. My father was looking at Colt rather than the camera, the way he looked at things he was assessing for structural integrity, with attention and without performance. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I added it to the folder on my phone where I kept things I wanted to be able to find again. Presley called me from Portland the following Tuesday. She had seen the photographs and had heard the broad shape of what had happened from my mother, and she called me in the evening while I was making dinner, her voice carrying the particular quality it always had when she was trying to decide whether two feelings were compatible. "So you raided his bank account," she said. "Dad raided the account," I said. "He's a joint holder." Dallas. "It's accurate," I said. "You coordinated an elderly man too?" "He's 63, Presley. To pull money from his adult son's checking account to buy plane tickets to a destination wedding." "Yes," I said. A pause. Then a sound that was Presley trying not to laugh and partially failing. "I'm not saying you were wrong," she said. "I'm just saying it's a lot." "It worked," I said. "Mom sent me a photo of her and Dad on the beach," Presley said. She paused. She looked like herself. Like the version of herself I haven't seen in a while. I turned the burner down on the stove. "Yeah," I said. There was a quiet on the line that was the Portland evening kind, her apartment, the rain that was apparently always present in some form, the particular quality of distance that was 350 miles of Interstate 5 and also something else, the distance she had put between herself and the family machinery, which had cost her something and had also been right. Both things at once. The distance had let her see clearly in a way that proximity sometimes prevented. It had also meant she wasn't there when showing up was what was needed. Both of those things were true and she knew both of them and had made her peace with the accounting. "What happens now?" she said. "With Ren." I thought about that. About the conversation I'd told Colt I'd have when things were calmer, which was still ahead of me, which I had no illusions would be easy or brief or fully resolving. About what it meant to build a future with someone in the middle of a family that had history and weight and the particular dynamics of families that have been close, the ones where proximity is both the thing that holds and the thing that chafes. "I don't know yet," I said. "We'll have to figure it out." "Are you going to figure it out?" "I think so," I said. "Not quickly. Not cleanly. But I think so." Presley was quiet for a moment. Outside my kitchen window the evening fog had come back to its station at the river's edge, the same reliable presence, the same gray-blue density in the low places between the houses. "She said something," Presley said. "Ren. Mom told me." At the reception, not publicly, just to Mom, just the two of them for a minute by the bar. "She said," Presley paused as if deciding whether to finish. "She said she understood that you were protecting them. That she didn't agree with how you did it. But she understood why." I didn't say anything. "Mom said she gave her the fig preserves," Presley said. "And Ren cried." I stood at the stove with the spatula in my hand and didn't answer for a moment. The fog was at the window. The burner was low. Somewhere down the street a car moved slowly through the neighborhood and its headlights crossed the kitchen ceiling and kept going. "Good," I said. Presley let that sit for a moment. Then, in the tone of someone who has thought of the next question and decided to ask it, "And what about Colt? Where does that sit?" "It sits where it sits," I said. "We're not fixed. He told me that himself and he was right to. What we did with the account, even if it was structurally sound, it went around him. And I told him I'd given him the chances to handle it, which I had, and he said I know, which was honest of him. But knowing something and having processed it are different things, and I don't expect the processing to be fast." "So you wait," Presley said. "I wait," I said. "And I stay available. And when he calls, I answer." Another silence. The fog was doing what fog does, thickening at the low places, the river invisible now, the houses across the street just their lit windows. "Dal," she said. "Yeah. I'm glad you answered the phone that morning. When Dad called." "He called me," I said. "I just asked about the account." "I know," she said. "That's what I mean." We talked for a while longer, about nothing important, about the things that accumulate in the space between two people who have chosen each other across distance, the rosemary and the fig tree, and whether she'd gotten enough preserves this year, and whether the new job had the rhythm she'd hoped for. The ordinary material of being sisters, which was its own kind of structure. The kind that didn't require maintenance announcements because the maintenance was built into the conversation itself, the regular presence of it, the ongoing fact of the other voice on the line. After I hung up I stood at the stove for a minute in the warm kitchen with the fog at the window and the burner still low and the smell of whatever I'd been cooking, garlic and something else, the same combinations my hands knew without instruction, and I thought about the preserve jar in my mother's carry-on. How she had put it in first. Before anything else, before the navy dress, before the sensible shoes she wore on planes, because she was the kind of person who thought ahead about comfort. The fig preserves first. That told you something. Not a small something. The third call from Colt came 2 weeks after the wedding. He called on a Sunday evening, which was not the pattern of our previous calls. Those had been urgent daytime, the calls of a person in the middle of something. This one came at 7 after dinner and his voice was different from the very beginning. Quieter. Less velocity. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said. About giving me chances. Okay, I said. I think you were right that I handed things off to Ren that I shouldn't have. The logistics. Mom and Dad. I let her be the wall between me and the hard parts, and I told myself that was her choice when it was actually mine. I sat down on the couch. The television was off. The room was quiet. That's honest, I said. I'm still, he paused. What you did with the account, even if it was technically legal, it felt like you went around me instead of to me. That's something I'm still working through. I want you to know that. I hear that, I said. But. A long pause. Mom and Dad were there. And that, his voice shifted, the way it had shifted when he'd said I know on Wednesday, the quiet two-word admission that carried more than it appeared to. That mattered. It mattered more than I expected it to matter. We were quiet for a moment. Not the hard silence of the confrontation. The other kind. We're not fixed, he said. I want to be clear about that. Me and you, Ren and the family, we're not fixed. But I don't want to stay where we were. Neither do I said. Another pause. Then, almost to himself, not the deliberate placement of the words he'd used before, but something more involuntary, something that came out because he was still carrying it and needed to put it somewhere. Mom and Dad were never supposed to be at this wedding. His voice was quieter now. Not hard. Just the residue of a position he had held and was now slowly examining from the other side. That's what I said. That's what Ren and that's what we decided. And I've been sitting with that sentence for 2 weeks now, trying to understand what I was thinking when I said it. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. The sentence had said what it said, and he knew what it said, and the knowing was a different thing than it had been when he'd first said it in the deliberate, placed way of someone holding a position. You've got time to figure it out, I said. Yeah, he said. We talked for another 20 minutes, not about the wedding, not about Ren, not about the account or the Portland letter or the co-trustee designation. About the Tacoma in my father's garage, which my father had apparently gotten running the previous weekend and had taken down the block twice before deciding it needed more work, which was its own kind of satisfaction. The discovery that something you've been tending has become what you were tending it toward. About Presley's job in Portland, the urban planning work, the way she described it to me in terms that suggested she was doing something that used all of her. About a restaurant Colt had found in Kona during the wedding week that he wanted to tell someone about and hadn't had anyone to tell. A small place, family-run, on a back street near the water, the kind of place you only find if you're not trying to find a place but are instead just walking and paying attention. He described the fish he'd had in enough detail that I could almost taste it. Apakapaka, he said. Over rice with ginger and a sauce that was simple and exactly right. The kind of place where the menu was short because they had decided to do 4 things well rather than 12 things adequately, which was a philosophy you could respect in a restaurant and in most other contexts. Did you take Mom and Dad there? I asked. A pause. Then yeah. Thursday evening. Ren was at the spa with her sisters. I didn't say anything about the logistics of that. It was enough that it had happened. Dad ordered the same thing twice, Colt said. The apakapaka and then the apakapaka again when I suggested we get something different for the table. He said it was the right call and he wasn't going to apologize for it. He's not wrong, I said. No, Colt said. He's really not. Something in his voice when he said it, the particular quality of someone who has spent an evening at a small restaurant with his parents and has arrived, in the middle of it, at the understanding that this is something he was almost not able to do. That the evening itself was not incidental. That the apakapaka twice and his father's position on it and his mother's expression across the table were all part of a specific texture of experience that he had been arranged to miss and had instead, by a series of events he was still examining, received. Small things. The ordinary material of being related to someone, the residue of a shared life that persists even when everything around it is complicated. The things that endure not because they are large but because they are true, and because truth, it turns out, is more durable than position. When we hung up I sat in the quiet room for a while. The fog was at the window, it was always at the window, and the street was still, and the kitchen still smelled faintly of dinner, and I thought about my mother in the navy dress and my father looking at Colt instead of the camera with the assessing attention he gave to things he was checking for structural integrity. I thought about what held. What, when you tested it, was actually load-bearing. 3 things I kept coming back to in the weeks after. 1. The accounts we forget we're still standing on, the old agreements, the unchanged names, the documents in the back of the accordion file, they don't expire just because no one is thinking about them. They are still there. They still mean what they meant when they were signed. Someone built that structure once and maintained it without announcing the maintenance, and all you had to do was read it. 2. The people who pack on Monday before they've been told anything is certain are the people who have decided to believe you. That kind of trust is not nothing. It is, in fact, the thing most worth protecting, the thing that makes the reading of the documents worth doing, the thing the documents were ultimately in service of. 3. When someone tells you their parents were never supposed to be somewhere, when they say it once in a parking garage with deliberate precision, and again in a hotel in Hawaii with their voice finding its footing, and a third time in a quiet room 2 weeks later trying to understand what they meant when they said it, listen to all 3. The first time is a position. The second time is a defense. The third time is a question. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real emotional truths many families carry. If this reminded you of your own family, the ones who packed early, the ones who almost didn't make it, the ones you're still figuring out, tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe for the next one.